Now, in order for us to start using Redux Saga, we have to include it into our application. So we can do that by yarn adding the library Redux Saga. And while this package is loading in, we have to change up our code base a little bit to incorporate the Redux Saga middleware into our store. So let's go to our store.js. And what we want to do is we actually want to import in create Saga middleware from Redux Saga. We're also going to remove our thunk middleware because we're not going to need it anymore. We're now replacing thunks with Redux Saga to handle our asynchronous actions inside of Redux. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to make a new variable called Saga middleware using our create Saga middleware function. And this can take an object with certain configuration settings on it that we don't need. But that's what you can do with the function, and that's why you invoke it. But we're going to pass the Saga middleware into our middlewares array. And then after apply middlewares get called, we're going to run and add in the individual sagas that we're going to write. So we're going to use our Saga middleware, right, .run, and inside of run, we pass each individual saga. So let's comment this out for now, because we're not going to do it until we write our actual Saga code. Now, from a file architecture standpoint, all we do with sagas is we put them in the same Redux folders that are going to handle things related to, for example, our shop. We're going to put our shop sagas in our shop folder, as you would expect. So in here, we're going to make a new shop.saga.js, and this file will hold all of our Saga code related to our shop. And what we want to do is we want to move the functionality that we currently have related to this fetch collection start async action, and we want to put all this logic into our Saga. And we got to do it using the almost generator function style that sagas expect. So we learned a little bit about yield when we looked at generator functions in the last lesson, but we're going to flesh it out a little bit more in this lesson. So what we're going to do is we actually need to import in certain effects from sagas, and these effects allow us to do different things with either the store, like creating actions, or listening for actions. First thing we're going to bring in is what's called take every. And what take every does is it listens for every action of a specific type that we pass to it. So let's just bring this in first from Redux Saga, right, /effects, which is the effects library where we're going to take all these effects that we use to compose our Saga code. We also need to import in our shop action types because we know we're listening for specific action types. And now what we're going to do is we're just going to write our first base Saga. And it's going to be a function that takes that star syntax, as we saw, and it's going to say fetch collections start. That's what the Saga is going to be called. Now, what this Saga does with the effect is it's going to pause whenever a specific action type that we want comes in. So we have to make sure to yield our function, right? And then call our take every, passing in the shop action types dot whatever the action we want, which for us will be fetch collection start, as the first parameter. The second parameter that take every gets is another generator function that will run in response to this take every listener. So this is how we actually are able to trigger more code to run depending on an action type. We need to write another generator that will then do the expected thing that we're looking for. So I'm just going to make another one called function fetch collections async, right? So this is going to actually be our generator function that does the asynchronous code that we want it to do. For now, all I'm going to do with this code is I am going to console.log something in here like I am fired. So here we're going to pass our fetch collections async. And this is pretty much all we're doing. Now we might get an error because we have to yield something. So we could just yield this, right? Our console log. All generator functions must have yields in them. Now, what is the point of the yield? I know we've seen it a couple times and we know that our functions pause whenever we hit the yield, right? Until we call .next and then our functions continue as we saw in our generator lesson. But what sagas do, what the Saga middleware does, is its whole purpose is to run these sagas all concurrently. Concurrently meaning it wants to run them all together in a way that does not block the execution. So what does that technical jargon mean? Well, imagine if we had multiple sagas that were listening, right, for different actions, that were then triggering these other functions. Well, we might want our code not to be waiting for each of these functions to finish, because in here we know we're going to make our asynchronous request, right? We know we're going to query the database. If we're waiting for the database to come back, we want our application to continue to run, no problem. It doesn't need to wait for that request to come back because that would be blocking our JavaScript code. Well, take every, which is this Saga effect, actually creates a non-blocking call in order to not stop our application to continue running either other sagas or whatever the user wants to do. It doesn't pause the JavaScript waiting for anything inside of our fetch collections async to come back. Alternatively, we are also actually able to cancel these tasks that are coming out of our function. And by task, I mean whenever we kickstart this saga, it's actually a task that our Saga middleware is running in the background of our code to perform the action that it's supposed to do, right? Whatever code we write in it, like say our fetch collections code. If, say, for example, the user fired the action again, fetch collections start again, while the previous get collections request was still processing, we want to be able to cancel that one because we don't want to fetch that multiple times. We only want the most recent one that we got or that the user fired. And at every yield, what's happening is that we're yielding control over the Saga back to the middleware, to the Saga middleware. And then the Saga middleware, if it gets, say, another take every action call from here, it can then determine whether or not to cancel any of the previously started sagas from the other actions that came in. We can control that because of the yield. Now, I'll show you how we're going to do it. It's actually very easy, but conceptually, that's why there are these yields, and we write these yields whenever we can inside of our generator functions. I know it's all extremely technical, but the more we write it, it will make sense. I promise it'll make sense. But for now, just keep that in mind. That's why we have these yields, because we want to yield control of these sagas back to the library. But let's actually throw our saga into our store where we want to run it. So what we'll do is we will import in our fetch collection start saga from shop saga.j. Sagas, sorry. This should be plural. Sagas. And then we just put it in this run and we uncomment our code. And now if we go back, open up our console and go to the shop, we will see that, oh right, because we're firing still our async action, right? We removed our thunk middleware. We have to remove our thunk middleware as well. So, okay. Inside of our shop component, let's switch over this fetch collection start async to just fetch collection start. We just want to use our fetch collection start method. And now all that happens is that once our fetch collection start fires, right, our Saga's code logs I am fired. So what ended up happening, if we look at our Saga code, our fetch collection start action came in. Our Saga fetch collection start was listening for this action. The moment it heard it, it fired off our fetch collections async generator function. And then our IAmFired got logged. And that's the order that it happened. So that's pretty much Sagas and how they listen for actions. We just write them with this format, and we use this take every effect. There are other variations of this listener effect that slightly modify how the Sagas are listening, but we'll explore that later. Right now, this is just all this Saga is doing. Now let's flesh out our fetch collections async Saga to replace what we had before in our thunk action.